Welcome to episode 11 of the Woodworking for Beginners video series. In this episode, we're going to be making an outdoor garden hanger. So our focus will be on cutting joints. No, not that kind of joints, wood joinery type joints. Now there are many different types of joints that you can do for wood joinery. We're going to be covering a very basic one. It's called the Rabbet, and it's not the rabbit that brings you chocolate eggs every year. So with that said, let's dive in and get dirty. So we could, if we wanted to, just go ahead and butt these two pieces up together, put some pilot holes in here on this side and screw it in, and that's fine. But with a rabbet joint, we're going to measure out 1.5 inches, which is the dimension of this lumber, and we're going to cut a 1/2 inch groove out of this. So we're going to go a 1/2 inch deep. So when we put this together, it'll actually be somewhat like this, but inside of the wood. Now there are many different ways to cut. Now there are a few ways that we can cut a rabbet joint, and I'll show you some of the most popular. So our first option is we can go ahead and cut this joint on a table saw. Now I've got my combination square here set at 1/2 inch. So what I want to do is I want to lower this blade to that 1/2 inch mark. And I want to make sure I'm on one of the teeth at the top, so I have that exact 1/2 inch. The next thing I want to do is I want to set my rip fence for 1.5 inches. Now when I measure out my 1.5 inches, I want the 1.5 inches to be on the back side of the blade. So I'm going to measure out the 1.5 inches just like that. Now you see how I have the 1.5 inches on the back side of the cut? Normally when I'm measuring out a piece of wood and I want to cut it at 1.5 inches, I would put the 1.5 inches on the inside of the cut. So I'm cutting an 1.5 inch piece of wood. But in this scenario, I want to cut it at 1.5 inches, but I want the 1.5 inches with the cut. So now that I have that and I have my rip fence set at the 1.5 inches, now I just want to make multiple passes. My first pass is going to be with the board butt up against my rip fence, and I'm going to make multiple passes while moving the wood out. So let's go ahead and get that started. All right, so now that I have those passes done, I can take a chisel and I'm just going to break out all of these cuts. And then the last step, I'm just going to go ahead and sand it down. And there's our rabbet joint. So now we're going to attach these pieces of wood like this. So you can see we have the groove cut in here that fits this piece exactly. So that's one way we can cut the rabbet. So you can also cut rabbet joints with routers. That is another option. So if you're using a handheld, I would recommend, you get about a 1/2 inch straight bit on there, and you set your router depth to about 1/4 inch. A 1/2 inch cut is really puts a lot of strain onto a handheld router. So, and you'll have to make multiple passes. So you'd make your 1/4 inch passes, and then you'd have to come back, set it another set the depth at another 1/4 inch. So you've got your 1/2 inch, and again, make multiple passes. Now, on the other hand, if you have a router mounted to a table, that's going to be a lot easier. So if you have a 1/2 inch straight bit, you can simply set up a fence at 1.5 inches from the start of the router cut, and then set your blade depth at 1/2 inch, and then you could simply just make multiple passes using the rip fence as your start, and then multiple passes to get it to the edge. Now, when you're doing that, I would highly recommend that you use a piece of scrap wood on the back side of the cut, because it will cause some tear out. So a mounted router works pretty well when it comes to making a rabbet bit. You can do it with a handheld, a little more work though. My recommendation is a table saw or a hand saw. Go ahead and get yourself your 4 rabbets cut, and then we'll come back to start the assembly. So if you're back, you successfully cut the 4 rabbet joints. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make a mark on this piece of wood on the back side from where the joint is at 3/4 of an inch. And then I'm just going to draw a line across. Now this is the halfway mark, 3/4 of an inch, to the 1.5 inches that we have here, because that's where I'm going to put my screws in. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. And the same thing with this piece. So go ahead and get those marks, and I'll see you in a moment. All right, so now that we have those marked, I want to put some glue on them, and I'm going to glue this thing together. So now that I have my glue on, I want to clamp it with some bar clamps here, just to hold the whole project together, because I'm going to be putting screws in it next. So the reason I put the clamps on it is, even though I am going to be putting the pilot holes in, I don't want this wood to shift on me when I'm putting the pilot holes in or putting the screws in. So now go ahead and put 3 pilot holes on each line that you drew at 3/4 of an inch. So once you have your pilot holes in, we're going to go ahead and grab our countersink, and we're going to countersink these holes. So for this next part, I'm going to go ahead and use these 2.5 inch deck screws, and I'm just going to screw the project together. So you should be looking at a frame similar to what I'm looking at here. Now you can adjust the measurements if needed. The measurements I used were for the hanging planters that my wife brings home all the time. But if you've got a different type of planter, that's fine. Now, you'll notice here how we use the rabbets. So we actually put our wood, now one thing to note when you're doing the rabbet is you are losing some wood here. So what I mean is, I wanted this 20 inches. So I nailed it. I got it 20 inches. But I had to account for the fact that I lost a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch here. So if I would have cut this at 20 inches, this would actually be 19 inches in here because of the rabbets that we cut. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach it to a little bit wider base, because, I mean, this is kind of wobbly if she puts one of her plants in here. So I have a 1x8. Now what I'm going to do on this 1x8 is I'm going to find the center point. So 1x8 actually measures out to 7.5. So I want 3 and 3/4. I'm going to do that for both sides. 3 and 3/4. So now I want to do the same exact thing on my frame. So I've got 2x4s. They measure out at 3.5. So I'm going to make a mark right on the edge here at 1 3/4. And I'm going to do that for the other side. So now that I have those marks, I can line them up with the marks that I made. Actually, as it turned out, I'm going to make these marks longer. I just want to make sure it's long enough to where these marks actually touch the frame. So once I've got that, I can line up the frame to these marks, and I am right in the center. So now that I'm centered that way, I'm going to use my combination square, and that is 1 3/4, and that is 1 3/8. So I'm going to slide it a little bit this way, 1 inch and almost 1/2. So I'm going to check that measurement here on the other side, and it's just a little off. So I'm just going to slide it just a hair this way, and then I'm going to redo this measurement. So I'm going to butt the combination square up against the base and the project. And there we go. So now they both measure out a little under 1.5 inches, and that's fine. So now I know I'm centered this way. Now it's just a matter of relining up the marks I made, and now she's in the center. Now that I have that, I'm going to make marks on both sides. Take it off the base, and I want to put some glue down. Now I can put the project back on, line it up with all my marks, and voila. So after I have my glue down, put a couple of these scrap 2x4s. I'm going to put the project onto the 2x4s, and then line up my marks that I made. So it's perfectly in the center. And then clamp it down. So the reason I'm doing it this way is because I want to put the screws in on the bottom, not on the top. So now I can remove this, remove this. So the last thing I'm going to do is, remember, this is a 1x8, and that measured out at 7.5. So I'm going to set my combination square for 3 3/4, which will put me right in the center. Now I can make 4 marks. I'm going to use 4 screws. Now using those 4 marks, I'm going to put 4 pilot holes in. Now if your drill is trailing on you, go ahead and use the scribe to start the holes. So I got my 4 pilot holes. Now I'm going to use the countersink. I'm going to go ahead and put 1 5/8 deck screw in each one of the holes I cut. Now I can take my clamps off. So the last thing I want to do is I want to put my hole in the top for the hook. So we're going to find the center. Again, that's 20 inches. So I'm going to make a mark at 10. And then it's 3.5 inch piece of wood. So 1 3/4. That's where I want my hook, right there. So I'm going to get my pilot hole. So I got my hole drilled for my hook, but I'm not going to put the hook in just yet. The reason why is we need to do some finish work on this. This is about 45 minutes to an hour worth of sanding. And then we've got to protect it. Now, this can be an outdoor or an indoor project. If you're going to use it outdoor, make sure you're using exterior paint if you're going to paint it. If you're going to stain it and put a urethane on it, make sure you use spar urethane. If it's indoor, all bets are off. You can go ahead and put an interior paint. You can spray paint it, or you could stain it and just use a regular urethane. So after an ungodly amount of sanding, the finish I chose was I put linseed oil on this project. Linseed oil is spectacular when it comes to an outdoor finish. You can simply use the bottom of a water bottle and a little 2-inch chip brush to apply it. Apply it kind of heavy, so linseed oil will actually soak into the wood. When you come back to the project, just take a rag, wipe off any excess, which there probably won't be. So that's it. We have finished episode 11. We have one more episode to go in the Woodworking for Beginners video series. This episode focused heavily on doing the wood joinery, the rabbet. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon to be notified of new episodes as they become available. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments section. I'll get to them as soon as I can. If you would like to support my channel, I'll place a link in the description so you can make a donation. I'll also link all of the items that I used to make this project. So until next time, keep it safe.